Hello everybody and welcome back to another realistic automation guide. Today we'll be doing American 1960s cars, which is probably one of my personal favorite decades apart from like 70s, but yeah, it'll be a good decade. It's just about everything's a muscle car in this decade, and you'll see what I mean too. All right, first thing, the body styles, there's a lot of body styles you can actually pick from. The early 60s, I'd recommend you pick this, the Winga Dinga. This would probably be good if you're going for a compact car as well. There's a lot of compacts here in the 60s. I'll get to that here in a bit. Be good for compact cars. Those are race cars, Europeans. These would be good for compacts as well, because that sort of looks like a early Ford Falcon to me. And there's other body styles. Let me get to the other version of it. Basically, 60s had a lot of uniform body styles, though. Like something like this or the other ones beforehand would be usually a uniform body style would be used because they were very well boxy or they were round in the early 60s and boxies in the mid to late 60s. And like this would be another good one. And basically, that would be 70s, and it's really all ones that I guess you could say are it. Those are just recommended. Back to this one. Give me a minute. Body style. Note. Cars now they all had a compact flawless fleet. Like GM had the Corsair, Ford had the Falcon, and Chrysler had the Valiant. And I'm pretty sure AMC still had the Rambler. And they might have had... No, the Pacer was in the 70s. That's like way later. So yeah, there's compacts and stuff. Not like a compact like a Pacer or a Pinto yet, but it was still like it was compact for back then. The Corsair, Falcon, and Valiant, they're all like 105 to 110 inches wheelbase long, which is compact for the 60s. So there's that. It had multiple size from mid size, yeah, and full size compacts, yeah. Another thing, if you really want to go with that, they kind of sized them up from like compact 105-inch wheelbase, mid-size to like up to 115, and in full size up to 125 inches. And there was like sporty models, there was like sporty models for like the mid-size and a full size. There was like a luxury model for a mid-full size, basic model, stuff like that. Just a little tidbit note if you really want to go full on. There's a lot of them that's just like good. Like one example for a full size would be like the Impala, the Bel Air, and the Shy Biscan for like the full size lineup. For sort of how it could work like that. Now onto this. Panel material, steel, good old American steel, of course. Chassis type, ladder, unibody. Actually, all of them had some sort of unibody now. Like the GM Y body that was on the Corsair. The F85, I think it's called. I forget if it's that or Jet. Ford Falcon and Ford Mustang. The Ford Mustang is based on the Ford Falcon. The unibody. It's like unibody, but it's got like a chassis, but it's like still unibody. And then the Chrysler C body is genuinely a full size like unibody car too. Like, you can look it up. It's pretty amazing. The Valiant, I'm pretty sure, was unibody, but it's basically, yeah. I'd say, of course, the ladder for everything else. A compact car would definitely be unibody. Chassis still steel. No galvanized or corrosion resistance. Everything's still front longitudinal. Front suspension, everything has gone fully independent in the front. It was a normal. It didn't always have double wishbones, but it was basically some sort of front independent. So front should always be double wishbone, and then in rear should still be like a leaf axle because of the Hotchkiss drive system I shall always mention. Engines, they're actually kind of limited right now because really the big what everybody had was an inline six, like a to a V8. But of course, GM had the oddball stuff like the Fireball V6 that was made in the 60s. That was actually used until the 90s, like the 3800 that was used in like the late Buicks. That's what that is, or at least based off of. GM also had an i4 based off of what I think their inline six line was. And the Corsair had a genuine flat six. And it was turbocharged too. It was like it was a phenomenal car. The only thing is deadly oversteer. Let's see here. And of course, the displacement for inline sixes, that was your go-to for all, because the displacement was 2.5, 4.5 liters, 153, 275 cubic inches. Yes, there was like small to big for the inline six, because those were for economy, and then V8 is for the real like power and luxury, because you get the 4 liter to the 8.2 liter. But of course, Cadillac had the big 500 cubic inch. The average like biggest engine you could put in there was a 427 cubic inch, and a 427 cubic inch was actually there because NASCAR had a limit on block size, and 427 cubic inches is 7 liters, and they meant to do it for 7 liters, which I thought is always weird because NASCAR in the 60s and they're using metric. That's just weird. But yeah, they did have bigger blocks like Chrysler 444. No, not the 440. I'm sorry. The Ford had a 460, and of course, the Cadillac 500, but usually biggest you could put in there is a 427. And the smallest, 244, that's like rare. Block material, usually cast iron. GM had a handful of all aluminum V8s. They did. Like, I think the 327 Camaro, it was the Z something Z28, I want to say, that had an all aluminum block, and it's very rare. And GM really went on with that aluminum stuff. You'll see with these later videos. And then head materials, usually cast iron. Aluminum might be found on big blocks. GM had a lot of aluminum big blocks heads as well. Like they had a lot of stuff like that. Of course, heads and valves, push rods. Pontiac and Jeep had an overhead cam 6. Yeah, they were actually pretty big. I forgot about the Pontiac, but the Jeep was basically the overhead inline 6 replaced the Go Devil, or I'm pretty sure, and that was on a lot of Jeeps back then too. And then of course, I'm sorry. Make everything over square by like a minimum 0.2 inches. They sometimes went up to an inch as well, but it was just kind of like approximation. Let's see here. Cranks, conrods, and pistons are usually cast iron. GM had forged crankshafts in their big block V8s. Believe it or not, they did. And like, I think the SS models with the 396, I know that had a forged crankshaft. And that's really mainly it. Well, that's not it. I think GM had the only one. For forged internals, believe it or not, you actually could. What was it? Which Shelby was it? One of the Shelbys had forged internals, whole forged internals, crankshaft, conrods, and pistons. I think it was the GT350. It had full forged internals. Yeah, there's actually a little problem because if you're going to make a big engine, you might have to use forged internals. I'll show you, because even right here, we're using just regular cast iron crank, and we're running out of power. And I'll go to this 427 cubic inch engine I made. Where's it at? Right here. Right here, just like a regular 4-barrel. Performance V8 on 427 cubic inch I made. The only way it could really survive all of this horsepower is forged. So you might want to do that if you're making a big engine. You don't even need it for a big forged engine. I'll show. I had a this is a 354 cubic inch engine. And it actually struggles with everything, even without forged stuff. So if you really want that extra reliability for just not, I guess just forged if you want to, but that's a little warning, more or less than anything. Let's see. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that smaller V8, 306 cubic inch. Oh yeah, top end. Tuning, make as much as you can because, well, in the muscle era, basically everything with a V8 was basically a muscle car. Well, not basically everything, but a lot of things really were. Before a muscle car was a muscle car, like the Pontiac Le Mans before the GTO in '64 with the tri-power. Dodge Polara with the 426 wedge, that could be classified as a muscle car before the GTO and whatnot. But basically, '60s, big engines, big cars, etc. And there's a little special note: inline six had 8-9 compression ratios, V8s had 9-10, and performance had unlimited, and that is because of the fuel. Inline sixes used regular, standard V8 used super, and from what I've learned, performance uses avgas or avgas, however you pronounce it, because genuinely I read somewhere that there was 104 fuel octane up to at a Sunoco offered. It's at least Sunoco. It's wild. Let's see here. 4,000 up to 7,000 for performance. Got 5,500. Yeah. Yeah. RPM limits was low. Oh gosh. This is actually kind of high, but it's a small block, so it's fine. Bigger engines, smaller RPM limits. But you still, good luck getting high RPMs though, because you might not reach them. And the engine block's just going to shit before you do. Which is good luck for that. Compression, okay, yeah. Standard high-tuned. Not even high-tuned V8, just a standard V8. Let's see here. Carburetor. There's an option for fuel injection, I know that, but there's no cars that use fuel injection except the 60 to 62 Corvette, but that's a Corvette, and even then sucked. And so fuel injection was also very experimental. I don't think Bosch actually had a whole fuel injection thing. That's for a European car, not American. So that's for another video. Carbs, 1 barrel for inline 4s and inline 6, single banked. 2 barrel and all small block V8s under around 6 liters, 366 cubic inches. And some big blocks had a 2 barrel. A Chevy 396, again, it actually had a 2 barrel, but that's a rare option. A 4 barrel was optional, starting on optional in some 350 cubic inch V8s. I think starting mid late 60s, that was really a thing. I think late 60s, I'm pretty sure. Because that was a big thing in the 70s. Or not a big thing, but a more prominent option in the 70s. Now, 4 barrel is standard on 400 cubic inch V8 up, and of course, performance stuff. Because, if you had a small engine, basically, of course, single barrel on inline 4 and inline 6. If you have a small 306 cubic inch V8 like this, that'd still have a 2 barrel. If you have something big like a 400 cubic inch, it put a 4 barrel on it. But actually what they still did, even if it was like a small engine like Chevy's, again, 327, it had a 4 barrel on it. So if it has a small engine, you could still put a 4 barrel for performance. And of course, keep the single carburetor for regular, twin 4 barrels for performance, or triple 2 barrels, also for performance as a tri-power, tri-package, whatnot, whatever you call it. Yeah, basically that. Manifold, I would actually keep the manifold as high horsepower as you can get. So no compacts. Good luck using really standard low, because I couldn't find it helpful. Standard mid and performance mid, probably you're going to use. Standard mid for regular cars, performance if you're going for like a little muscle car setup. I know muscle cars and standard cars, but it's just like, I should say, a big engine that could be used. Cause that's actually another thing I should mention. Just about every engine was offered in just about every other car. So even the big 427 cubic inch could be offered in like that mid-size car. And it could be made into a drag racer. Because the big 427 cubic inches are usually made for NASCAR and are tuned. Headers, no compact cast. Well, compact cast is actually still used for inline 4s and inline 6s. It's just now casts, low and mid, are now used for V8s and performance stuff and whatnot. And tubular, believe it or not, tubulars are actually used in a lot of performance engines too now. They didn't look like that, like the big stainless steel chrome tubular headers. They looked very weird. They were just like straight down into 4-into-1 headers. Yeah, very unique looking. Exhaust, single or dual, that's up to you. No catalytic converter because of leaded gas. First muffler or resonators were actually starting to become a thing in big V8s starting in the late 60s. Not all of them had it, but some of them had it. I don't remember the engine, but basically all the big V8s started to get first mufflers in the late 60s. And of course, second muffler because you don't want to drum out your ears. All of these could actually be used like a coupe, a fastback. That was actually a thing. Starting to be a thing in early mid 60s, somewhere around that. 2-door fastbacks, not a 4-door fastback though. Convertible, a Ute, and then that's like a van. Like, I don't know how else to describe it other than like a hearse van, sort of. No, it's not a hearse, but 4-door thing. Styling is actually a very interesting thing. 1960 is probably the last year you could ever put tail fins on a car, because of the 1960s. As soon as 1960 hit, everybody was tired of cars looking like rocket ships. Like, as soon as 1980 hit, everybody was tired of disco, because that just died immediately. And one big car that led it was the 1960 Lincoln Continental, as that led the kind of design forward forever. This is probably last year it could look like this. Dual headlights, small grille, bumpers, big tail fins. As cars more or less looked more uniform, more conformity, more, I wouldn't say boring, but more sleek, I guess, to kind of look like this. As this is like a mid-60s car. Probably look like, well, this is a 68, never mind, this is like mid-late 60s, but yeah. It's boxy, it's uniform, it's still got chrome, which can't go crazy. It looks a bit like a muscle car too. Like, even just regular mid-size and full-size cars looked like that. Like the what was it, Torino? Like the Ford Torino, like the Dodge Coronet, AMC. No, the machine. That's like a package, but you know what I mean. Basically, it looks like this. It's very sporty. These side indicators actually came along in the late 60s. I think around 68 was 68 or 69 was the first years these side indicators came in. Verse lights finally came in, actually, and I think 62 or 63, reverse lights finally came in. Cars actually finally got options for, like, dual mirrors like that. I'm pretty sure. But they really wouldn't become standard until, like, 70 or 71, whenever they really cracked down on smog and safety. Yeah. I'd say just look at the cars at the time if you really want a better design advice. Drivetrain, of course, rear-wheel drive only. Yeah, Cadillac was fancy with the longitudinal front-wheel drive, starting with the 69 Eldorado. That was a longitudinal front-wheel drive, even with that 500 cubic inch V. No, 500 cubic inch V8 wasn't until 68 or 69. No, yeah, so it's still in the 60s. Let's see here. No 2-speed manuals. It was a 3-speed manual, or a full 4-speed manual, and of course a 2 or 3-speed automatic. 3-speed manuals were base standard. 4-speed manuals actually came. Well, no, they were just optional and everything. 4-speed manuals were optional and everything. I don't think they really were a standard, except if it was like a purpose-built muscle pony car. And then automatics, 2-speed automatics were of course a thing. With like Power Glide, a 2-speed automatic, and then 3-speed automatics were a little bit bigger. Those are also optional, like 3-speed torque flight. And the gearing, a little guide for that, as low as 2.5 for highway gearing, because the new highway thing's around, so you need low gears for thing. 3.25 low is standard. It could go a little lower, like 3, but 3.25 is about around the lower. Other gear ratios would be optional, and it would go short to top speed being about 120, because that's really more on performance stuff. But you can also, but they're really optional. You can have an option from gear ratios from like 2.5 to like 4.5. Those gear ratios. And the average top speed would be about 120. I think maybe 100 for some of them, but yeah. 2.7 first gear, high speed, final 3-speed. That should have been more in depth. Thanks. I don't know. If you're confused about like a really in-depth gearing setup, honestly, basic mode's pretty good. Let's see here. Differentials. Open is standard. Clutch LSD found on performance. Yeah. I think GM had the really most known one. It was the Pause Traction. Yes. GM. Well, no, actually, I don't know if they had a bit. But the other ones, like Ford and Dodge, they, believe it or not, they actually had some sort of clutched LSD. I don't think they had a proper name. They probably did, but I forgot it. And auto lockers are actually found, like a Detroit locker. The Ford Mustang, I know that 69 and 70 Ford Mustang, they had an option for a Detroit locker, which was, well, an auto locker. Of course, you only have the manual locker option, so I'm pretty sure those would come a little later. A little sandbox tech tool thing, you know. Yeah. Tire types, of course, crossbuy is still in use. You could probably use sports now, because of course, sports, muscle cars, whatnot. Yeah. Very sporty age. I know I'm getting into like muscle cars and stuff, but the standard cars, you could still make it a muscle car with like such a precise thing. 165, 185, 80Cs for compact, 85, 200, 80s for midsize, 9215 for full size, that for limo. They'd all have 80 for 90 profiles or a plus 1 inch rim. Yeah. There was still you probably still look up a realistic tire, an actual tire chart for cross plies, but they look a little weird because they looked like F1478 or something like that, because it was all imperial measurements of how they measured it. Because the biggest tire would, because like F1478 or whatever I'm thinking of looking at is actually like 215 ADC 14s, sometimes ADC 15s for the bigger ones. Believe it or not, I don't think you can actually get that tire size in automation because, of course, automation likes to be finicky. Brakes. 9 to 11 inch brakes, depending on rim size. Yeah, like 13 inches, like 9 to 10, 14 inch into 11. And actually, 15 inches actually got 11. Brakes, I've looked this up. Brakes never went to 12 inches. There were never 12-inch brakes. They always went to 11 inches. With 1 inch right below it. Even on drums. Drums all around were still standard. 1 piston disc on luxury and muscle. Starting late 60s. Yeah. Cadillac also had pistons. I think Lincoln had the pistons too. Yeah, they did. They all had pistons, and then even something like a Camaro, I think 67 or Firebird, 67 or 68 had piston solid disc in the front. So I'd say late 60s it actually get braking power, but of course none here. None here. You get it in the back, not in the front though. Yeah, no. Aerodynamics, as far as that would go, well, NASCAR, there was an aero wars going on. You'd see a big fuck off spoiler wing like the Dodge Daytona, of course, but that was immediately banned. But there were actual spoilers and lips and whatnot. They weren't big, but they were there. Was there bench? All around bench was still standard. Up front bucket on muscles and performance cars. Yeah, those you still had big bench seats, big couches. I think actually, I want to say another Eldorado or personal luxury coupes. They were touring coupes, personal luxury coupes, really, at the time. They were also starting to get buckets up front. Well, if it's a standard car like this, it's just benches all around. Entertainment, radios were starting to become standard. They're standard on base cars like Chevy, starting in the late 60s, on premium cars like Buick in the mid 60s, and on luxuries like Cadillac in the early 60s. So, as early as the 60s, you could really get a standard radio. But I remember reading somewhere 50s, somewhere when the transistor radio was actually invented, somewhere in the 50s. Cadillac kind of had that already standard in the 50s. But, like Lincoln and Chrysler, I should say, started to get it in the early 60s. But that's another reason why radios were now becoming standard, because the transistor. It's a reason why a lot of things actually became standard in the 70s, because of manufacturing. Steering, recirculating ball was still a thing. Hydraulic ball is still an option. And it was, there we go. Full size starting in the early 60s. Not the just the early 60s. I think it was early as like 61 or 62. I saw somewhere. I forgot what website it was. It was somewhere in the 62. That big full size cars, 120-inch wheelbase. They got power steering. This is actually mid-sized car. This is a very optioned out car, if anything. By the way, the premium 500. That's another thing. 500, 400, 300 was like a naming scheme for like trim levels, I think. Whoops. I did it again. Standard, of course, was standard. Progressives were optional for heavy-duty suspension, like cop springs, as they would say. Hydropneumatics, that was Citroen. They made that, and this is an American car, not a French car. Twin tube dampers were still standard. Gas monotube standards, they were for late muscle cars, yeah. Yeah, I actually got late muscle cars. Actually got gas monotubes, sometime there, and then of course suspension tuning, soft, soft because luxury. Usually, you might want to go a little bit more for old muscle cars, but they were still like mushy. No. Front stabilizer, standard and full size, usually GM, might be present in muscle cars. If you need correct oversteer, go ahead. Yeah, front stabilizers or sway bars, like sway bars as we know it, were actually invented and were actually kind of implemented during the 60s. They still didn't get them, but if a car has like major oversteer, the car would receive sway bars, like full size cars. You can't make a full size car without getting sway bars on them because it would just poop out. So that's what. So, and of course, if your car just oversteers, like a Corvair, just sway bars, that helps it. Ride height, still as low as it can go. These things were low. And that's actually it. Yeah. Want another example of something like early 60s technology, I should do that. It's like manual, still 3-speed automatics. They were starting this early 60s. Wheels. Bigger wheels is funny. Still drums, aerodynamics. Basic AM radio. I think this is, this is like actually option now. So that would be an option. Hydraulic, that's an option. This is a, mid-size. So that hydraulic would be an option. There's that. And so, yeah. So I would say that's all for this guide. Thanks for watching. And of course, this will be in the description if you want to read this instead of listening to me babble on. So I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.